8th, 2022. Could we call the roll, please?
Heath,
Here.
Leek,
Here.
Mitchell,
Here.
Moreno,
Here.
Phillips,
Yeah.
Here.
Rigby, Stewart,
Here.
Councillor Mance.
Is there anybody joining us by Zoom? Any commissioners?
Have Director Scott Siegel, and if not, nobody has joined yet.
Okay, so what we see is who's here this evening. Thank you. Do we have council update? Doesn't. Oh, he is? Okay, let's proceed. It doesn't look as though we have a council update this evening. And I don't have, do we have anybody who wants to make a public comment of anything that's not on the agenda this evening? Thank you. I don't have any updates for Commissioner for Citizen Involvement this evening. We do have to approve them, in which case we'll go to the minutes. We want to approve the minutes for November 14th Planning Commission meeting. Do I have any comments or corrections or additions that would like to be made to these minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. Second.
Thank you. Anyone all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Anyone abstain? Okay, the minutes are approved. Let's go next to our public hearing on the issue in front of us this evening. Do we have anyone who would like to testify tonight?
On the public hearing, we do.
Madam Chair, if you'll just go ahead and read the subject matter of the public hearing, I'll handle the process, and then
Okay.
we'll take public testimony.
The commission is holding a hearing to consider the proposed amendments to Chapter 50, the Community Development Code of the Lake Oswego Code to clarify existing standards and make other code maintenance amendments. Our staff coordinator is Johanna Hastay, Senior Planner. And with that, I open it up for public comments or
I'll review the process. This is a legislative decision, which is generally a policy decision within the discretion of the City Council. Planning Commission will review the legislative proposal and make a recommendation to the City Council. Although a legislative decision may be discretionary, it must also comply with any applicable state law, as well as any applicable statewide planning goal or administrative rule adopted pursuant to ORS Chapter 197. A legislative amendment to the Community Development Code must also comply with the applicable provisions of the Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan. The public hearing process will begin with a presentation by staff, and testimony will be received from the public. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Recognized neighborhood association, homeowner associations, government or government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. The time limits do not include time taken by questions from the commission or responses to such questions. Testimony by attorneys, representatives, and witnesses on behalf of which part of the presentation by a person shall be counted within that person's time limit. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. At this point, I would ask the commission members to please declare if you have any financial conflicts of interest. Or any financial conflicts of interest need to be declared?
No?
No.
Seeing none, Senior Planner Johanna Hastay with the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Johanna Hastay, Senior Planner with the City of Lake Oswego, presenting for the initial public hearing for the 2022 Annual Code Amendments. I don't have any written comments to add to the record, so we'll just dive right into the schedule. We're here tonight for the initial public hearing to return with findings on December 12th, and then going to public hearing at the City Council, right now scheduled for January 17th. We've gone over the maintenance amendments. They're attachment 2 in their final form of the report that was sent out to you. That table has the commentary explaining how the amendments arose and what the intent of each amendment is. There are 17 amendments total, and as the chair and the city attorney pro tem explained, they update, restore, and clarify existing use zone overlay development, variance and procedural and definitional standards throughout LOC Chapter 50. The amendments are in compliance with the applicable comprehensive plan goals and policies as outlined in the staff report. And in order to save time tonight, since these 17 amendments didn't generate much discussion, I'd like to just turn it over to the commission to see if you have any final questions on these 17 maintenance amendments, and then turn my focus to the policy amendments. So any questions before we move on?
Commissioners, any questions, comments, additions? Okay, please proceed.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have 6 policy amendments, and I'm just going to go through them in order. Some of them generated, 2 of them actually generated some feedback at the last Planning Commission work session. So we'll go through those in some detail and then lightly discuss the remaining 4. So the first one is a policy amendment to the building design standards. There is a regulation there that requires structures to be located within 30 feet of a public street, and the main entrance then oriented towards that street. So there's a lot of planning value in this regulation. It means that there is a direct connection between the public sidewalk and the front of the building, the entrance to the building. It also means that there's not vast seas of parking between a public sidewalk and a building, so kind of opposite the very car-centric development plans from the 50s on up until better zoning regulations came to take over. The value is very obvious, and we see it in downtown locations, but what we also saw in a review over the past 20 years was a tendency for public projects on larger properties to apply for a major or a hardship variance, because they did that the goal, the value of that, having the structure close to the street, didn't work for them. So over the past 20 years, at least seven public projects applied for and received major variances. And that would have gone on, I think, indefinitely, but a couple of years ago, I'm not sure exactly when, maybe 7-8 years ago, we had a situation on Hazelia Fields where they received a development review permit, and it was for parking lot and for play fields, but also public bathrooms. And when they got to the final design of it, they realized that they had to also apply separately and after for a major variance to this zoning location requirement, because they didn't realize that they would have to locate the public bathrooms between the street and the parking lot, rather than its more natural and obviously usable location between the parking lot and the actual fields, so further away from the public street. So after that happened, shortly after that happened, within a couple of years, I don't know the exact time frame, this locational regulation was amended to exempt structures and parks. So right now, this standard applies, but there are some exceptions, one of them being structures and parks. So for the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center, because that was a structure in a park, they did not have to comply with the standards. And so you saw the public sidewalk, parking lot, and then the building, located about, I think, 125 feet at its closest point to the street. So looking at the situation where over and over again, public projects were having to apply for a major variance and extra cost and time and hassle, staff did that initial amendment to waive the requirement for structures and parks, but that was a half measure. It still didn't address the ongoing situation with public schools also having to get a major variance to this standard. And looking at those major variances, it was clear that there was an operational conflict there, that there were circulation needs for buses, for pickup and drop-off, for public parking in between the public street and the school, that basically made compliance with this regulation a problem, rather than adding value to a site design like its intent was, to create that connectivity, that close connectivity between the public sidewalk and the structure. So looking at the existing exemption, staff's thought was, bringing this code amendment forward, is let's add an exemption for all structures in PF and P&A zones. So again, that existing parks and structures, that pretty much covers most P&A zoned properties, but there are some that aren't developed as parks that are still zoned P&A, but so this would expand it a little bit there. But then it would also expand it for PF zone properties like City Hall, which, you know, we obviously meet our 30-foot build-to requirement on at least 2 sides here, but for some of these larger properties where schools are located. So that seemed pretty straightforward, but at the last work session, there was some discussion with the commission saying, well, what if there's a different locational requirement that would work better? And so staff was tasked with looking at those major variances to see what the range of distances approved were, and then also to maybe look to see if that would be a good substitute for that 30-foot requirement, or to see if maybe an average would be better, or maybe an average plus 10%. That was another idea. So the current code, like I said, is 30 feet. The range of those 7 major variances, and again, I'm not sure if I captured all of them, but I think I captured the majority of them. The minimum approved was 60 feet. The maximum approved was 315 feet. That yielded an average of about 120 feet, and then the average plus 10, again, a suggestion just thrown out as something to look at, would be 132 feet. Now again, the point of this regulation is to ensure a building's proximity to a public sidewalk. That's what it adds to the site design. An arbitrary range, ranging from 60 to 315 feet, doesn't achieve that value. The average, or the average plus 10, also doesn't achieve that value. It really is looking at it with this specific type of use, these public facilities, and their operational needs. There's a conflict there, and either you can comply with it because of whatever circumstance, or you really can't, like a lot of these public schools. And so staff is still focused on that waiver, because I didn't see any value in a different locational requirement. Those numbers seem pretty arbitrary. But we did add in some language that basically would compel an applicant to provide a finding as to why you can't comply with that 30-foot requirement, that you'd have to show that there was some operational conflict or a conflict with an operational need. And so the applicant would have to do an analysis to basically show that they should be able to take advantage of that waiver. And that was, again, understanding that maybe a complete waiver didn't feel like the best way to go, but then also that the locational possibilities that came up with this research and past variances didn't yield a better number. So instead, that there's an analysis to show that you should be able to take advantage of the waiver. So that's what staff is proposing. That's what's in the code amendments now. And I guess I wanted to turn that over to the commission to see if I've addressed your concerns or if you have any other direction for staff before we move to the council.
Commissioner Heap.
Yeah, just a question on clarification. Is it correct to understand that right now there's an exception for parks, but really the issue is coming into play with only schools? Or would this apply both currently to schools and parks? I seem to understand that maybe there's an exception in place that takes care of parks. It's just schools that we have the issue with now. Is that correct?
Actually, not quite. So not all P&A zone properties are developed as parks. So the current exemption only applies to, like, say, the Iron Mountain Park or to Azalea Fields or something like that, where it is a P&A zone property and it is developed as a park. So the reason we were able to take advantage of it with the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center was that it was developed with park amenities as the golf course. So we could say, okay, the Lake Oswego, the LORAC, as we call it, could also take advantage of it because the majority of the site was developed as a park. So it's not all P&A zone properties that have that exemption. But yes, there would be, with the PF and P&A zones, it would cover public schools.
Does that mean then like areas like Rasik, they would be interested in this amendment?
Well, RESIC is already approved. So if they didn't comply with the standard, then they would have to come back and get a modification to their approval, or if they didn't comply with it and they got a major variance, then they've already dealt with the issue.
Do we know if they're interested in coming back? Construction hasn't started.
I don't know if it actually had to comply.
Right.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know that there were structures approved with that park. But if future structures were to come up, like public restrooms or some sort of, some other park use there, then they would be able to take advantage of it.
Commissioner Mitchell? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Chair Week. So we have been having technical difficulties with folks that are trying to, commissioners and Director Siegel, who have been trying to join us via Zoom. So I've been advised that we'll need to take a short break. So I thought that'd be good to do that so that Miles Rigby and other folks could help
Participate.
and ask Johanna questions if they wanted to.
Okay, thank you. Commercial break. I believe Commissioner, who was it? Stewart had a comment. Thank you.
Can I get
So I had a question,
course.
are all schools in the PNA zone in the city?
They're actually in the public function zone,
Or
public schools.
But
are-
they're all in a public,
Yeah,
and that's under this?
it would be.
That's all.
Does this change make things easier for the planning department?
Not having to process a major variance under, I'm not going to say dubious, but maybe slightly questionable circumstances, yes, would be very helpful. A major variance has a very high threshold, and it shouldn't be used as a standard waiver to this regulation. I would say that it perhaps dilutes or confuses its applicability.
Okay.
So yes, it would be better from a planning perspective to not have to turn to a major variance over and over again for the same situation.
And we've updated a lot of things since the 50s, so why not this? Okay, go ahead.
And Commissioner Stewart, just to clarify, public schools are zoned PF. There are some private schools that are on different zoned.
Right, that's what I was insinuating, because I'm thinking of when they renovate or when they rebuild Lake Oswego Junior High in a couple of years. I mean, if you follow this to the letter, they have to move it right up against the street, and that seems a little,
Or apply for a major variance, yeah.
right, it just doesn't make sense.
And I reached out to the Lake Oswego School District just to see if they had any upcoming projects that would be caught in this. And they said right now, they're looking a lot of major renovations, which wouldn't trigger it if the existing school footprint stays as is. But he could foresee projects in the future, it being a better process to have this waiver rather than to have to apply for a major variance. That there are some upcoming projects.
Thank you. Moving on.
Okay, no other questions on that one?
Anyone else? Any other questions?
So the commission is comfortable moving forward as it's written in now, saying basically that there is a waiver if operational needs are shown to be in conflict with this requirement? Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you very much. And I appreciate the pushback on that. Digging a little bit deeper helped me understand it quite a bit more. So moving on to the second policy, which it looks like we don't have the PowerPoint slide, but I believe that's been posted online.
I've got it.
Okay, for those participating remotely, hopefully you have it. This is a policy amendment that modifies the noise-producing mechanical unit setbacks. We have standard setbacks of 5-foot side and 10-foot rears. But what we found by standardizing it is that there are very limited scenarios where some underlying zones, the RW zone in particular, and then some planned development subdivisions that have lesser setbacks than that. So let's say they have 4.5 or 3-foot sides or 5-foot rears for some reason. And a lot of times homes are built up to those setbacks. So basically, the standardized setbacks are great in most situations, but we wanted to build in a little flexibility and allow those noise-producing accessory units like HVACs, generators, heat pumps, things like that, to take advantage of the underlying zone or planned development subdivision setbacks if they are lesser. So any questions about that?
Commissioner Heap?
Yeah, maybe just a comment. I think earlier I had commented too that it seems like there's a big difference. I mean, some of the newer air conditioners and noise generating equipment, they're extremely quiet. I mean, it doesn't matter how far back, they're just like really, really quiet. But the concern would be that we don't differentiate for any of that. It's just we generically refer to them, and that, you know, it seems like it might make more sense if it was, you know, quantified a little bit more to say, you know, equipment that had a noise less than a certain dB or some other, you know, metric.
I would say that that would add a lot of complexity to the code. We don't have any sort of noise engineer on staff, so we'd have to come up with a metric that would explain for each of the different units what the dBH or the decibel level value would be, and with the units constantly changing to get quieter or, smaller or bigger, that I think would add in some uncertainty to the process. And the point of this was to streamline the permitting process for these sort of mechanical units.
I could understand that. Like I said, I could see both sides of it too, where one is that you have a newer type of unit that just doesn't produce any noise, whatever, so it doesn't matter. It's like it could be any distance almost. But then you could have maybe a cheaper unit, one that, generates a lot of noise. And I think the residents would be very unhappy with that we move the code back. So.
I would just add that the notice went out for this exception. That is, if the setback is less, then it gets to move less. If the commission is considering changing the substance of the underlying criteria, I would want to renotice that, because I think it's brought it into scope.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it may be something to consider for your next annual update.
Fair enough.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this? All right, I guess we're
Moving on to number 3.
moving on to number 3.
Okay. So policy amendment number 3 deals with the patio offset from property lines. Right now, the code calls it a setback. Setbacks only apply to structures, not at-grade slab work like a patio. Staff has been applying this to patios, even though technically the code was not written correctly. And so basically, this is just a code fix to ensure that the 3-foot offset for patios from property lines is maintained, and that's great for maintenance. So we don't have patios going right up to the property lines, and you have to trespass on your neighbor's property. It also helps with stormwater runoff in that there's the 3-foot offset there to direct any stormwater runoff and manage it on site as required by code. This amendment also gets rid of some waiver/liability language that has never been used since this was adopted. And finally, the setback would modify the Oswego Lake standards to allow patios in the Oswego Lake area similar to decks. Again, a practice that staff has been allowing for a number of years, perhaps erroneously, but we were making the assumption that patios and decks were very similar, if not patios being less impactful. So this amendment catches up with staff practices in 2 ways. Any questions on that one?
I have a question. Many properties have easements along the sides of their properties for utility easements. Are patios allowed to be built into the 5-foot setback? But if someone has to dig up for a sewer easement or electrical, then they would have to disrupt that. Is that accurate?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that would depend upon the language of the easement. Does it? So the zoning code does not get to the
Okay.
easement part. So a property owner would need to review their easement provisions.
Okay, thank you.
So the commission is comfortable moving forward with this as amended?
I see no other comments
Okay.
being made.
Number 4 was the next policy amendment that generated a lot of discussion at the last work session, and that was dealing with possibly allowing engineered or composite wood in 2 of our overlays where they are specifically prohibited today. That's the West Lake Grove Design District and also the Lake Grove Village Center Overlay District. So again, this material is only prohibited in those 2 overlays, in all residential zones, on all residential projects, and throughout the rest of the city. It's either allowed or not specifically prohibited. And so when we were looking at amending this code, looking back to when the prohibitions were adopted, the quality of that material was obviously a lot less. And so we had gotten comments from developers and from project managers for recent projects in both the Westlake Grove and LGVC wanting to use that material, and so we started thinking about amending the code. There was some requested research from the commission at the last work session, asking to dig a little bit deeper into potential cons of allowing engineered, or the cons of engineered and composite wood, period, basically in comparison with real wood. So I did some online research, and I also reached out to our local development community. I just emailed, I think, 8 or 9 different consultants, architects, designers that I had worked with over the past 10 years, and I got back 3 responses. And I said, hey, the city is considering allowing these materials and these 2 overlays. Do you have any ideas about potential pros and cons? Any feedback on whether you found them to be a good material? And the 3 that responded, the consensus was absolutely do allow these materials, especially because they have improved. They understood the prohibitions, but noted that the product had improved, especially over the last 10 years, and that they did see a definite cost benefit to allowing these instead of requiring real wood. A lot of them also talked about, with that quality increase, the ability for the layperson to tell the difference between engineered and composite wood, even with stained, but especially with painted treatments, was very minimal. I also looked at the online research, like I said, didn't really know where to start with that, so I basically just Googled it. And there were a bunch of websites, and so I looked at 3 or 4 of them. And as far as potential irritants from off-gassing or chemical impacts, they did say that there were, but a lot of the websites noted that those irritants came from improper installation or improper use of those product. So I would say that that type of impact, potential negative impact, depends on the quality of installation and use of the product. Most websites were very clear in that as far as non-wood siding, if you're including vinyl and plastic, engineered and composite wood was much better than vinyl and plastic. So I think we're in the right direction, that those are still 2 prohibited materials. But a lot of the websites were very consistent in saying that the longevity and the durability of this type of product, the pest and fire resistance, all of it was greater than real wood. But of course, the caveats that I saw over and over again is it does depend on the installation and ongoing maintenance of the product, just like with real wood, but that was an aspect. For sustainability comparison, basically what I saw was a lot of pros and cons for both. With real wood, you have harvesting and milling impacts. With engineered or composite wood, you have the industrial manufacturing impacts. Both of them have pros and cons. Transportation costs are going to depend based on whether or not it's real or fake wood. Doesn't really matter. There's, whether it's a local product or not, has more impact on whether it was with the transportation costs. Disposal impacts, that was kind of an interesting one, going down that rabbit hole. While if you're looking at the horrendous crunch and dump, all of the materials going into landfills, which I think a lot of jurisdictions are getting away from. But yes, obviously real wood has fewer impacts. It can decompose quicker in a landfill. But engineered or composite wood has a longer lifetime. It's more durable, so you don't have to replace it as often. So it was kind of a counterbalance to its impact in a landfill. And again, a lot of jurisdictions are incorporating more sustainable demolition measures into their regulations, and hopefully getting away from that, moving all of that material into a landfill in the first place. So again, I didn't discover any more cons to engineered or composite wood, none that good installation and ongoing maintenance wouldn't offset. I didn't see in comparison how it was any worse than real wood as far as siding. And I did see a lot of benefits, and I got that from the online research and again from the outreach to the local development community. So I am recommending that the commission move forward with the amendment as proposed, which is turning it into an allowed material on those 2 overlays. And then also going through the rest of the code and just making sure that the language referencing this type of product is consistent. Any questions on that?
I have a comment. I think that should be allowed because even if you used real wood products today, the quality of the wood is not the quality of what it was 20, 30 years ago because they're harvesting smaller trees. And so I think it's a wise thing to do. Anyone else? Seeing no other comments, I think the commissioners are in agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait.
Let me just remind you, you're asking questions of staff, you'll take public testimony, then you'll deliberate on the matter.
That was my comment, was I'd like to withhold until we have public testimony, and then I'll give my feedback, so, yeah.
Right. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, that was it. I'd like to hear from the public testimony. I
okay.
withhold my kind of view with my deliberation until we've heard from the
All right.
public testimony.
Any questions about this issue, though? Okay, see. Let's go to number 5.
Okay, thank you. So the 5th policy amendment has to do with accessory dwelling units and clarifying the use-specific language regarding variances. And with the commission's approval, we also decided to move down the path of allowing a few more minor variances with accessory dwelling units. So currently, the code only allows minor variances. The code only allows, in order to site an accessory dwelling unit on a site, or to locate an accessory dwelling unit on a site, the only minor variances that you're allowed to get are to the ADU design-specific variances, and that's the height of the windowsill, the location of the main door, things like that. The commission did approve looking at allowing minor variances to some zone dimensional standards as well. And so the ADU use-specific standards are modified to be a little bit clearer, stating that not only are minor variances allowed to those specific design variance criteria, they're also allowed to zone dimensional standards. And then the final aspect of that amendment says major variances, again, hardship variances or RID review design variances, are not allowed to solely locate an ADU on a site. And so basically it just clarifies what type of variances are allowed under the use-specific standards. Minor variances to a couple of things, no major variances, no RID review design variances. And then the second part of the amendment goes to the minor variance classification, and again, just says that, yes, the ADU design variance standards you can get a minor variance to, and now you can also get some to zone dimensional standards. And the way that shakes out is you might be able to get a floor area variance if you're bumping up against your floor area maximum and you have double the minimum lot size, then you could get a minor variance to site an ADU on a site and get if you need a little bit more floor area. You could also get a 20% reduction to a setback. So right now a lot of ADU structures have a 10-foot side, 10 to 15-foot rear. You could get a 20% reduction to that under this current amendment. So hopefully the result of this is to clarify which variances are allowed and to open up the variance classifications just a little bit for ADUs, to give them a little bit more flexibility for siting it on a site. Any questions about that?
I see none.
Okay. So the final one, I think, I wish we had our visual up here because I'm a fan of how this site plan demonstrates the issue that we're trying to fix here. This is with the Uplands Neighborhood Overlay, and they have a requirement. They saw the proliferation of multiple driveways on one side as an issue. And so they have a prohibition in their overlay. All properties are limited to one driveway only. Unfortunately, the unforeseen consequence was that with a minor partition, there was a situation, there's at least one, possibly two situations, where there was an existing home on the front lot with a driveway on one side, but the flag lot, the driveway serving the flag lot in the back had to be on the other side. There just wasn't sufficient room on the same side as the existing driveway. And so there had to be this ridiculous scenario where the driveway to the existing dwelling crossed the front yard and hooked up with the driveway serving the flag lot. And it was not anything that anyone wanted, but the only way out of that was a major variance, and as we've talked about, the threshold is very high for that. So talked to the Uplands Neighborhood Board and got their approval to move forward with allowing an exception to this driveway limitation under very limited circumstances. It had to be with a minor partition and obviously with a flag lot. And the prohibition on circular driveways, meaning a driveway that comes in on one side, crosses over and comes out on the other side of the front yard, is still in effect. So the uplands overlay is okay with this, especially because it will avoid the scenario that we talked about, the having the driveway crossing the front yard. Any questions about that? Okay, so that is my presentation for tonight. Again, I am recommending approval of ordinance 2909 as outlined in attachment 2, the code amendment table with a commentary. But I'm happy to take any questions after the commission hears public testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we open it up to public testimony. Good evening. Are you turned on?
Very much. Hi, I'm Carol Okert, and I'm testifying this evening on behalf of the Neighborhood Chairs Committee. And I appreciate the time that Senior Planner Hastay took walking through some of the codes and the annual code updates. That's very helpful when she's taken the time to do that. And so tonight, there's only one that I need to follow up on. In the August Planning Commission, I had a work session on annual code updates. And during that work session, Senior Planner Hastay presented two options with regard to accessory dwelling units. One option was to simply clarify the current code language that does not permit variances for ADUs. Option 2 was to change the code to allow minor variances to ADUs. The Neighborhood Chairs Committee asks that you find that option 1, to simply clarify current code language, be the recommendation that you send forward to City Council. We concur with Chair Lake's initial comment that with the recent new citywide code adoption for middle housing, that Planning Commission played an active role in crafting, that this is not the best year to make additional changes to accessory dwelling unit code. I looked back to the 2018 findings when the city adopted ADU code, and here's a quote from the City Council findings. Quote, with regard to variances, the council reiterated that variances should not be permitted to the site development standards of the zone, and the existing language in LOC 5003-0041B615 should be amended to make this clear, end quote. So this was an intentional choice after much community input on the part of City Council. I looked to the current code language for ADUs. Under the code that was cited above, it states in subsection 2 that in the R5, R3, R2, and R0 zones, ADUs shall be associated with a detached single-family unit only. But it goes on to say that in the R15, R10, R75, R6, and RDD zones, AD use is limited to 1 per lot. It seems to raise the question, will middle housing sited on a lot in the R10 zone be allowed 1 ADU? Prior to our new middle housing code, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes would not have been allowed in an R10 zone, and this question would not even have been possible. Now, middle housing is allowed in the R10 zone, so this code may be allowed for middle housing sited in the R10 zone also to have 1 ADU on the lot. Whatever the specific interpretation staff makes of this code, I think this example illustrates that we could use some time to sift through the new middle housing code and make sure we don't have some wrinkles to smooth out. Our neighborhoods will be evolving and adapting to code that got citywide support and the buy-in of the neighborhoods. The Neighborhood Chairs Committee asks that you support option 1 for Policy Code Amendment 5 on ADUs. Simply clarify code language. The Fan Forest Hills Board has asked that as their land use liaison, I also represent and reiterate this to you and make the same request. Thank you for your consideration and the time you've invested at Planning Commission in reviewing our land use code. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Ms. Silkert?
You.
Senior Planner Hastay, do you have any questions for Ms. Silkert?
No, we spoke earlier today, and I'm sorry, Carol, that I didn't get back to you. I talked to Eric Olson about the middle housing and its impacts on whether or not an ADU would be allowed if a site was developed with a duplex. And in our reading of the code, it does say that an ADU is allowed when a site is developed with a single-family home. So in looking at it, my initial interpretation would be no, if a site is developed with a duplex, you could not also have an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. But I do appreciate Ms. Ockert's concern.
And I would add that that's our practice. We don't allow ADUs or more than one ADU. We don't allow an ADU in conjunction with anything other than a single-family residence. So that's very clear in the code.
Thank you.
And I'll just, the text, which is always what I'm driven by. An accessory dwelling unit may be allowed in conjunction with a single-family dwelling by 1, 2, 3, when the following conditions are met. So I think the text is pretty clear.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is you feel that option 2 that we're moving forward, we're proposing, is the way to go.
Well, to speak to Ms. Ockert's initial concern in that the preference for LONAC and the First Edition Forest Hills Neighborhood Association is to clarify which variances, or to basically rewrite that code section, which is subsection B, Roman numeral 6, parens D, to just clarify that major variances and review design variances are not allowed solely to cite an ADU on a site. I think that would be the preference that you're hearing from Ms. Ockert. She could clarify. That is not option 2, which is what at the last work session, what the commission directed me to move forward with. Option 1, which is would be their preference, would be just to clarify, and I think just to have that last sentence in there: major variances and residential infill design review variances solely to locate an ADU on the site are not allowed, and would revert back to the existing language before, which only allows minor variances to the ADU design standards. Again, the kind of windowsill height, location of the door, things like that.
Thank you. Director Siegel, did you want to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair Leak. Yeah, I was just going to back up what Deputy City Attorney Boone was saying, and actually the definition of accessory dwelling unit begins, quote, an accessory dwelling unit either internal to, attached, or separate from a detached single-family dwelling unit and on the same lot as that dwelling. So the definition is specific to lots that contain a detached single-family dwelling only. So I just wanted to mention that that is in the definition in Chapter 50. Thanks.
So it doesn't interfere with middle housing overlays?
Accessory dwelling units are not a form of middle housing, and they're really
Okay,
regulated apart from middle housing.
thank you.
And if I would add, the issue of whether you can construct 2 ADUs or 1, it might be sort of separate from the issue of whether folks would like to allow minor variances for an ADU. So I would clarify that even though we don't allow additional more than 1 ADU for a single family dwelling, of course, the concern would still probably be valid regardless. It is valid regardless, of course, but I would just say it doesn't necessarily matter if there's 1 or 2 units for that concern to be present.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Okay, seeing none, I suppose what we need to do now is start at the top and have the commissioners weigh in on how they feel on approving or disapproving of each one of these 6 measures.
And while you do that, this is, it's always an awkward code amendment because we've got 19 amendments before you. They're going to move forward as a package with the Planning Commission's recommendation. Your testimony or your deliberation would be incorporated into the minutes, and we'll take sort of a straw note on that thing. But should there be a disagreement among the commissioners, the findings will not reflect the minority position. That's the minutes. That's the function of the minutes. I just want to make that clear. So I think when we move forward on it, what you could see in the findings is those items where there was a split decision, perhaps just noted, but then the council would rely on the minutes to reflect the comments.
And we won't ask for a roll call on each item?
Well, you can take a straw poll.
Right,
Okay,
straw poll.
because again, the minutes would reflect, you know, what comments were, so we don't need a formal vote. We do need a formal vote at the end, and ultimately, a commissioner is going to have to decide whether to recommend moving it forward. A commissioner might be passionate against one item and say, if I don't get that one item, I'm not moving it forward. You know, that's up to the commissioners. But it's going to move forward because it's just a recommendation sort of thing. So, and your internal comments will be captured in the minutes.
And the city council will look at those to see what our comments were pro or against each item. Okay. We should start with number 1, which I need to pull back up again. Okay, so policy amendment number 1, LOC 50.06.001.5, point I, parentheses 2. Providing flexibility for structure locations in the PF and the PNA zones. Do we have any comments you'd like to weigh in so the city council can hear what your thoughts are? Commissioner Heap?
I'd just like to thank the staff for the clarifications. They were helpful. Some of my concerns were related to, like, what are some of the projects that we see upcoming, you know, and so we're talking about, we got feedback from the schools. We talked about the aquatic center, about Rasik. It seems like it is a long-term type of benefit, so I would be in favor of it, and I think the feedback was helpful.
Thank you. Commissioners? I agree. I think it's a good compromise from what it was and what some of the major variances you had to go through that were much larger. So I would be in favor of this. Commissioner Mitchell?
I am also in favor of it.
Thank you. Do we have a straw vote? Starting?
I'm fine with it, yes.
Yes?
Yes?
Yes, I'm fine with it. I think the 30 feet is more appropriate for an urban site, and most of these are not that, so.
I'm fine with it.
Thank you. Policy amendment number 1 by a straw vote is moving forward. Policy amendment number 2, do I need to read the whole? Okay. Okay. Setback exception for noise producing accessory units. Anyone want to talk about this? Do they have any concerns? Chair, Commissioner Heap?
Yeah, I'd like to just reiterate my earlier comments. I'm still concerned it doesn't address, you know, some of the potential problems that, you know, if we're not quantifying it by some, like, metric, like sound pressure level in TVs or whatever, that it could be impactful to residents. But I also appreciate that, you know, you went with these options beforehand, and I'd say based on our testimony that we have, move forward with it. I don't think it's worth rehearing or re-noticing this, but I am concerned.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I think it's fine the way it is, and as the years go by, things are going to change. Technology will change, and climate will change, and we may need bigger units that are more powerful. I know that the air conditioning units that were put in houses 20 years ago were not meant to lower the thermostat 40 degrees. They were meant to lower it 20 degrees. So the technology will be our guide as we go forward, and we may have to revisit this in a future date. Anyone else? Seeing no other comments or disagreements? Straw vote?
I'm fine with it. I'm not sure we can tell noise in feet, but that's okay.
I'm okay, and you can tell noise in feet. It's a dBSPL's measured on the A scale, which is, I think, 8 feet from the source, so, but I'm okay with it.
Thank you. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. I think in a more general sense, if a condensing unit is super loud, if it's 5 or 10 feet away from a property line, you're still gonna hear it, so.
I'm fine with it. I also think that over time, I think staff's gonna be able to notice that feedback and jot it down, and when it comes time to change it again, you will, if it is in fact a problem. But I'm good with it.
Thank you. Commissioner Mitchell?
I'm in favor of it.
Thank you. Looks like a policy amendment number 2 is moving forward.
About that train that comes by my apartment over here, can we regulate that
I
thing?
can't help you with that.
No.
Cold Warren Buffett.
Could show you some noise dampening glass options, though, if you'd like.
We could put a dome over it. Policy amendment number 3, update the code to ensure staff can implement a 3-foot separation of patio from property lines, et cetera. Does anyone have any strong feelings about this and would like to make a comment? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads, so this must be acceptable. Why don't we do a straw vote quickly?
Yes?
Yes.
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 Commissioner Mitchell?
Yes.
Thank you. Policy amendment number 3 moves forward. Policy amendment number 4, overlays and design districts to allow engineered and composite woods as exterior cladding and LGVC overlay in the Westlake Grove Design District. We have any comments? Commissioner Heap?
I think I'm just particularly sensitive to any changes like this that we're making in the Lake Grove Village Center overlay and the Westlake Grove Design District. I mean, if we look at the history that came before the Plan Commission, I mean, this area was brought to the attention of the city in planning, and that it was deemed a blighted area. And so I think there was a lot of scrutiny that was placed on that. It's like, really? We have blighted areas in Lake Oswego? And yet this qualified as a blighted area and got a substantial TIF that was put in place to address the blight and improve it. And so the concern would be that now we're going back and saying, okay, well, and I think on the slides that we saw, one of the key points, and I think some of the feedback that we got from comments that was received to staff was that it's cost. Yeah, and you know, I'm just concerned that, you know, we're taking a blighted area and we're looking at reducing cost, and does that really, you know, match what the public's expectations were with the improvements for that area? However, we didn't have any testimony about that. We only heard that, hey, people are really interested in cost, and if we can help in reducing the material cost, then, you know, they're all for it. So I'd be okay. I'm just really sensitive to what's happening in this area.
I agree with that totally, but I was also surprised that we didn't hear any feedback from either one of these 2 organizations regarding this particular issue. So if they must know about this, so I figured they must be all right with it. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we should always keep in mind looking for ways to improve cost, because the drawback is if we don't, then things don't get built, and then things stay the way they are. So, you know, we should always be sensitive of that, and I agree with your caution, of course, but you know, we're always thinking about ways to save costs.
And the affordable housing project will be in that area, and so being able to use materials that are more cost-effective would be an important part of that. Anyone else?
I just want a clarification. Okay, I understand this is cost and safety versus aesthetics, okay? But I'm assuming these different composites are different grades, grade 1 through 8 or something. Is there some check somewhere that, you know, if, you know, I mean, if the aesthetics could be really awful if you buy a grade 1 and, you know, that's pretty shabby over. I'm just asking, is there something in the building permits and stuff that somebody in the city can say, no.
So to address the comments made and specifically your question, no, we don't have any sort of grading standard in the regulations. We don't have it for wood and we don't have it for engineered or composite materials. I want to clarify that the feedback that I saw and also the research online that I did, this is not just cost. The aesthetics, the appearance of the materials have actually also vastly improved. To the point where if you look at the presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, I actually have two images there. One is fake wood or engineered or composite wood, and the other is real wood. And I specifically went for stained because I think that a lot of times people, when you paint wood or engineered or composite wood, you can't really tell the difference, but a lot of people believe that you can with stained. And I don't know, again, to the layperson's perspective, if they could tell the difference between the two, if they could tell me which image was the fake wood or engineered or composite wood and which was the real. So it's not, just to clarify the outreach that I did to the local development community and the online research, aesthetics are actually maintained with this wood now. 10, 15 years ago, I would agree with you. When these prohibitions were put in place, aesthetics was a big part of it. But the materials that are already prohibited that downgrade the overall appearance and aesthetic of a building, like vinyl, plastic, metal sidings, those are still prohibited. This particular type of product has improved in both cost effectiveness, but also, very importantly, in appearance. To answer Commissioner Phillips' question, the staff, whenever we get a development review permit, we look at and get materials from an applicant. And so we can see the quality of grading. I have imposed conditions of approval for past DR permits, say for asphalt shingles. Those are ubiquitous, but sometimes a thicker grade creates a better appearance than a thinner grade. And so I've imposed a condition of approval, or I've made it a necessary change in a project to go with a better quality for better appearance. So it is something that we analyze, whether or not we catch it 100%, or what we see as an example actually works out well on a big building. That isn't guaranteed. But a lot of these bigger projects, they're multi-million-dollar projects, and they want them to last and they want them to be attractive because they won't be able to get tenants, either residential and or commercial tenants, if the appearance of the building isn't great. So there's kind of a built-in quality control there as well.
Thank you. I think the other issue is these materials have less maintenance as the years go on as opposed to natural materials. So that's another good reason to allow them.
If they've been properly installed, which is a problem with all exterior cladding materials, especially in this climate. So.
Don't we know that? Do we have any other comments? Seeing none, do a quick straw poll on whether to move this amendment forward?
Based on the testimony, I would be okay, but I'm really borderline on it. I have a lot of concern, but I'll be okay with it.
I hear your concern, and I'm surprised that we didn't hear from the people who were being affected by this amendment change, but evidently they must be okay with it, so I move it forward.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Enthusiastically? I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, I'm looking at the list here, and we're talking about cost effectiveness and that, and it's not the least expensive material on this permitted list. So, I think again, anything that can be, there's a lot of times where brick and stone and wood products also get installed incorrectly. I mean, it really comes down to craftsmanship, and I think these days with this material being as popular as it is, there's a lot more certified installers of this product than a lot of other things. So, I'm okay with it.
Thank you.
There's also the environmental impact that you had mentioned, right? That you're not having to replace it as often. And so you're not.
If it's installed correctly and maintained, yeah. I want to keep putting in that caveat there because, again, there's no guarantee. But I think the point that Commissioner Stewart made was that not only is the project or the product improved, but installation, the knowledge in the industry of how to correctly install it has improved as well. I noticed that on my own house. When I bought it, it had engineered fiber cement siding, and it was installed incorrectly, and I had to replace a number of boards because they had cracked, and the company that did the reinstallation or the fix explained what had been done wrong. So, that was, when it was first installed, was 15 years ago, and it was interesting to learn that.
Thank you. Commissioner Mitchell?
I'm good to move forward.
Thank you. Policy amendment number 4 moves forward.
Thank you.
Policy amendment number 5 to clarify accessory dwelling unit per use-specific codes with regards to prohibition on major and design variances. Allow more minor variances to zone dimensional regulations. Anyone want to talk about this? Commissioner Heap?
Just say I'd like to thank the Neighborhood Coalition for their testimony, and after hearing from staff that this is really not only applies to single-family housing. It's not outside of the single-family housing. I'm okay with it, but I really appreciate the concerns and was really listening to what the Neighborhood Coalition had. The other thing that I see with this is, anything that we can help with the accessory dwelling units. I think everybody's aware that we're kind of in an affordable housing crisis right now. And so, to help with this code, I think is really important. At the same time, we got to be sensitive to issues that the neighborhood's raising. But again, based on the clarifications, I'm okay with it.
Thank you. Any other commissioners would like to speak to this issue? Again, I'd like to reiterate what Commissioner Heap said, and I really do appreciate the Neighborhood Association's chairperson coming and speaking to us and expressing her concerns. I'm glad that we have citizen involvement in this, but I feel it's okay to move forward with it, and if we have to change it again in the years going forward, we'll see. A straw vote? Mr. Phillips, Commissioner Phillips, straw vote, yes or no, move up or down?
I think this is the one where she wanted option 1, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with it. So option 1.
Oh, you're agreeing with option 1?
Isn't that the one that the neighborhoods were?
That's what Ms. Okert wanted, and this is not option 1.
No, so at the last work session, the commission directed me to move forward with option 2, which was clarifying the ADU standards, which variances were allowed, and also expanding it a little bit to allow some site dimensional or site development standard variances, minor variances. So what's before the commission today is not option 1. It's option 2, as staff was directed.
Okay, I'm going to have to apologize here, but I have a great deal of difficulty. I must have missed something somewhere. I have a great deal of difficulty going against the people that live in the neighborhood when they want something. Okay.
Well, that is why you're here, to voice that opinion, but Commissioner Heath?
If I may, Commissioner Phillips, I appreciate the comments that the neighborhoods brought too. My main concern with that is that it seemed like it was based on a misunderstanding, right? I mean, the comments were coming forth saying, hey, we're pulling in multifamily housing, middle housing. We could be mixing things too much with, putting ADUs and with multifamily,
So the middle.
yeah. And so that the staff clarified that, and I became okay with that, just because, again, it seemed like it was based on a misunderstanding that the neighborhoods had.
Okay, I'm fine. I misunderstood that part of it, and I'm okay.
It's easy to do. There's a lot of technical here. I get it. Thank you.
Middle income housing. Fine with what's here then.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Commissioner Heath, that was a yes?
Yes.
I am a yes.
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 Commissioner
Yes.
Mitchell? Yes. Okay, amendment number 5 moves forward. And policy amendment number 6, allowing flexibility with regards to the Uplands overlay driveway limitation. I'll just start off saying this is, to me, a no-brainer, so I agree. Anyone else? Mr. Mitchell or Commissioner Mitchell?
I agree.
Okay,
I
so,
think with the no-brainer comment, I approve.
okay. It looks as though the commission agrees that policy amendment number 6 should move forward also.
Thank you so much.
One comment.
Go ahead.
I would just say the one thing I note on this is like, it seems very unfortunate. The concern I have with this is like, how did it escape? You know, we put so much effort into the overlays, and we have some overlays that are coming up with like the PNA. So it makes me a little bit nervous to say, you know, as we're putting these overlays in place, there might be some unintended consequences like this. And I know you can't get it perfect, but it's kind of a shame we put all that work into the uplands overlay, and then we have to spend all the effort to fix it. So
Yeah, but that's the
hopefully,
purpose of having a body that can address something that wasn't thought through or addressed at the time.
And I think one of the other things that happens is current planning staff, people that, the staff that actually implements these codes and runs them through the building permits and development review permits and things like that, we are more heavily involved in drafting and reviewing code amendments as they come forward, and even overlays. So getting our input so we can get multiple eyes on it hopefully catches and fixes those unintentional impacts before it gets adopted.
Thank you, Senior Planner Hastay. You did a wonderful job, and I appreciate all your hard work
Very welcome.
on it. Thank you.
For the record, you also have the maintenance items that you didn't have any. Does the commission sort of agree with those by consensus?
The other 17, or
Right.
whatever, of the 17.
You don't have to go through them individually, but is there a commissioner that has any objection to any of those items?
Commissioner Heap?
I was just gonna say, no, I'm okay with 17.
I'm good with them also.
I'm also good with them as presented.
No objections.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We've made progress.
Got 17.
Motion to approve. Need a motion to approve.
Okay, we need a motion. May I have a motion to move these policy amendments forward?
I'll make a motion to move them forward.
Do I have a second?
The policy and maintenance.
Policy and maintenance.
Policy and maintenance.
Yeah, yes, I will second.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call on this?
Heath,
Yes?
Meek,
Yes?
Mitchell,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
Looks as though it's unanimous, and it moves forward to City Council.
Thank you. Written findings will be brought back to you at your next meeting on December the 12th.
Thank you. Do we have any other business that we need to attend to tonight? How about a schedule review?
That's the only item that I have for you remaining on the agenda. So at our next meeting of the Planning Commission, we'll be meeting here on December 12th for a hearing on nonconforming residential development. And that will be started out with and led by a presentation from Community Development Director Scott Siegel. And so that will be actually our last Planning Commission meeting of 2022. So kind of transitioning into 2023, we'll have our next work session on January 9th, 2023. That will be an update on the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking from the state, also from Director Scott Siegel, as well as a subsequent goal-setting session. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about the Planning Commission's goals for 2023. There's also a Boards and Commissions Summit coming up on January 12th that the Planning Commission is encouraged to be involved with, and that will be sort of a meeting of all the different boards and commissions as well as City Council to talk about goals for the upcoming year. Additionally, the second work session in January will be held on January 23rd, and that will be a work session, our next one on House Bill 2003, talking a little bit more about the housing needs analysis and housing production strategy work that we're engaging on. So lots to come in early 2023 at the Planning Commission.
Really, there is.
What time is the board and commission summit?
It is on January 12th. I can share the rest of the information with you from City Council, the city manager's office, once they give it to me.
Oh,
I
so
think,
you don't have a time yet?
I think they've set the time. I just am not sure exactly. It hasn't been distributed, I guess, widely quite yet. So anyway, it's on our schedule, and you will be prompted, with the exact date, of course. But just wanted to give you a heads up, I guess, given that you may not have heard of that yet.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And with that, I find that we're adjourned.